Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
When I was around 17 or 18, I had an experience in my bedroom that I still cannot explain. It happened sometime between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. I had been awake, watching television, which was normal for me at that age. The rest of the house had become quiet, and I was finally tired enough to sleep. I switched off the television, placed the remote on the nightstand beside my bed, and rolled over. Nothing felt unusual. I was not frightened, thinking about ghosts, or expecting anything to happen. I had only just turned away from the nightstand and closed my eyes. I could not have been lying there for more than 2 minutes when I heard the remote move. The first sound was a light scraping noise, like plastic sliding across the surface of the nightstand. I immediately recognized it. The nightstand was close to my bed, and I knew the difference between a sound coming from the television, the hallway, or somewhere outside. This came from the exact place where I had set the remote. Then I heard another sound. It was quieter and more difficult to describe. It seemed as though someone had lightly picked up the remote and then dropped it, or fumbled with it before letting it hit the nightstand again. It was not a loud crash. The sound was small and controlled, the sort of noise a person might make while trying to handle something without waking anyone. My first thought was that my older brother had entered the room. That would have been strange, but still completely ordinary. Maybe he wanted the remote, needed to ask me something, or was trying to scare me. I shot upright and looked to my right. There was no one standing beside the nightstand. My brother was not in the doorway. Instead, I saw something floating above the bed. The room was dark, but a streetlight outside shone through the small gaps in the blinds. Thin lines of weak light stretched into the room, enough to outline furniture and create pale patches against the walls. That light caught whatever was above the mattress. It looked like mist or fog. It was not a solid figure. I could not see a face, arms, or any recognizable human shape. It appeared more like a cloudy mass hanging in the air over the bed. At first, I assumed it had to be ordinary. Maybe it was dust illuminated by the streetlight. Perhaps smoke had drifted into the room. I might have been seeing my own breath, although the room was not cold enough for that. I sat completely still and watched it. The longer I looked, the less ordinary it seemed. The mist was moving. It did not drift steadily in one direction as smoke would if air were entering through a vent or window. It moved very slowly within itself, almost as though it were swirling around its own center. Parts of it folded inward and then spread out again. It seemed suspended over the bed rather than traveling through the room. I stared for what felt like several minutes. It may have been much less. Fear can stretch a few seconds into a long period. During that time, I tried to understand what I was seeing. I looked for an obvious source. The windows were covered by the blinds. There was no cigarette burning, no candle, and no machine producing steam. The television had been switched off. Nothing near the bed should have created fog. The remote was still on the nightstand, but I could not tell whether it had actually changed position. My attention remained fixed on the mist. Then the feeling in the room changed. A sudden wave of terror came over me. It was not the normal fear of seeing something strange and wondering what it was. It was deeper and more instinctive. Everything inside me said that the situation was wrong. I did not feel curious anymore. I felt as though I needed to leave immediately. The mist had not moved toward me. It had not formed a face or reached down, but something about its presence made the room feel unsafe. I got out of bed and ran. I did not stop to inspect the nightstand, turn on a light, or check the floor for anything that might have created the sound. I sprinted to my brother's room. Thankfully, he was still awake. He was playing Final Fantasy when I entered. I must have looked terrified because he turned toward me slowly, his eyes wide and confused. He asked, "What's wrong?" I told him what had happened. I explained that I had heard the remote sliding and being handled, then saw a strange mist floating over my bed. I expected him to laugh. My brother could easily have told me I was half asleep or that the light through the blinds had created an illusion. Instead, his expression changed. He looked uneasy. Something about my story seemed to trouble him more than I expected. I asked him what was wrong. He told me that not long before I ran into his room, he had gone downstairs to get some Pop-Tarts. While he was downstairs, he heard the china cabinet rattling. The cabinet contained glass items, so when it shook, the pieces inside made light clinking and clanking sounds against one another. He said it sounded as though the cabinet itself were moving or vibrating. At the time, it had frightened him slightly, but he had not paid much attention to it. Old furniture can shift. Glassware can settle. A heavy vehicle passing outside can make things in a house vibrate. He had returned upstairs and continued playing his game. But after hearing that something had moved on my nightstand and that I had seen mist above my bed, the cabinet suddenly seemed connected. Neither of us had an explanation. Two unusual events had happened in different parts of the house within a short period. First, the china cabinet rattled downstairs while my brother was nearby. Then, only a little later, the remote seemed to move and mist appeared in my room. The fact that my brother had experienced something independently made my own encounter harder to dismiss. He had not known I was going to come running into his room. I had not heard about the cabinet before seeing the mist. Neither of us had influenced the other beforehand. That night was the only time I experienced anything like it. The mist never returned. I never again heard an object being handled beside my bed when no one was there. My brother did not report the china cabinet rattling repeatedly. There was no continuing pattern of doors opening, voices, footsteps, or objects moving around the house. The experience remained isolated. That makes it difficult to decide what happened. The most likely explanation is that I was closer to sleep than I realized. I had just turned off the television and rolled over, even though only a couple of minutes seemed to pass. I could have begun drifting into sleep almost immediately. People do not always notice the exact moment they fall asleep. I may have entered a brief dream or transitional sleep state, then awakened suddenly. The sound of the remote moving could have been part of a hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucination. These experiences happen while falling asleep or waking up. A person may hear knocking, footsteps, voices, objects dropping, or someone moving nearby. The sounds can seem completely external. Because the remote had just been in my hand, my brain already knew its position and texture. A dream could easily produce the sound of it sliding or being picked up. When I sat up, I may still have been partly dreaming. The mist above the bed could have been a visual sleep hallucination continuing into the real room. Dream imagery often appears inside the actual bedroom for a few seconds. People see figures, insects, faces, smoke, shadows, or moving patterns. The streetlight gave the hallucination a real source of illumination, making it appear more convincing. As I woke more fully, the image may have slowly faded. From my perspective, I remained awake and watched it swirl. But the brain can maintain a visual hallucination longer than people expect, especially when the room is dark and the image is vague. This explanation fits the timing extremely well. I had just tried to sleep. The event began beside the bed. There was no physical evidence afterward. The mist disappeared, and nothing similar happened again. A sleep-related experience is therefore one of the strongest possibilities. The mist may also have been ordinary dust. Streetlights entering through blinds can illuminate particles that are normally invisible. If air was moving through the room, dust could swirl in a way that looked like smoke. A heating vent, fan, or change in pressure might lift fine particles from bedding, carpet, or furniture. Because the surrounding room was dark, the lit dust would appear as a separate cloudy form. The narrow beams from the blinds could make it seem suspended over the bed. My movement when I sat up may have disturbed the air and caused the particles to rotate. Once I focused on them, the pattern became more solid and intentional in my mind. Dust normally does not create a thick, visible cloud without a reason, but in darkness, even a small amount can look dramatic when caught in a beam of light. The same effect appears in old buildings, cinemas, and rooms where sunlight enters through a narrow opening. The particles do not glow on their own. They become visible only because the rest of the room is dark. A small source can therefore look much larger than it is. The remote sound may have had an ordinary explanation as well. I may not have placed it securely on the nightstand. Perhaps it rested partly on another object, a piece of paper, or a slightly sloped surface. After I rolled over, the movement of the bed or floor could have caused it to slide. The remote might have reached the edge of the nightstand, tipped slightly, and dropped back onto the surface. That could create both sounds I heard, the initial slide and the lighter movement afterward. If the nightstand touched the bed frame, my movement could easily transfer enough vibration to shift a plastic remote. The room may have felt still, but furniture does not need much force to move a smooth object. The remote could also have contained loose batteries or a battery cover that shifted as it slid. That might sound like someone briefly lifting and dropping it. Because I expected a person, my mind interpreted the mechanical noise as someone handling the remote. The mist could then be unrelated. I sat up quickly, disturbed dust or bedding, and saw particles in the streetlight. Fear connected the two events. Someone moved the remote. Something is now floating above the bed. The brain prefers a single explanation, even when two ordinary events happen close together. My brother's china cabinet also has several ordinary explanations. Glass cabinets often rattle because of vibration. A large truck passing outside could shake the house slightly. Heating or cooling systems can make walls and floors vibrate. Refrigerators, washing machines, furnaces, pipes, and other appliances may produce low-frequency movement that travels through a building. A cabinet containing glass is extremely sensitive to those vibrations. Even a small movement creates noticeable clinking. The house may have settled as the temperature changed during the night. Wood contracts when the air cools. Floors, walls, and cabinets shift slightly. If several glasses were touching, one small movement could produce a series of sounds that seemed more dramatic than the actual vibration. My brother may have walked heavily across the floor while returning with food. His own steps could shake the cabinet. He might not realize he caused it because the sound began after he stopped moving. The vibration traveled through the floor and reached the glass a moment later. The timing between the cabinet and my experience may therefore be coincidence. Unusual noises happen in houses every night. Most are ignored. My brother remembered the cabinet only because I later told him something frightening. Before that, he had already decided it was not important. My story changed the meaning of his memory. Instead of a cabinet rattling for some ordinary reason, it became the first part of a paranormal event. That does not mean he invented it. The sound was probably real. But our minds linked two separate incidents after the fact. The exact time between them is also unclear. He said it happened not too long before I came into his room. That could mean several minutes or much longer. Neither of us was checking the clock precisely. The closer the events feel in memory, the stronger the connection seems. Years later, the sequence may feel nearly simultaneous, even if there was a significant gap. Another possibility is that the same physical vibration caused both events. Something outside or beneath the house could have shaken the china cabinet and later shifted the remote. A heavy vehicle, construction equipment, distant train, small earthquake, or machinery might transmit vibration through the ground. My brother noticed it downstairs because the glass rattled. Later, the remote moved on the smooth nightstand. I may have felt nothing because the vibration was weak. The mist above the bed would still require a separate explanation, but it could have been dust shaken into the streetlight. This combined mechanical explanation is possible. One environmental event causes several small effects in different rooms. Glass clinks. A remote slides. Dust becomes visible. Because we did not recognize the vibration, the separate effects seemed mysterious. The house's air system might also connect them. When heating or cooling equipment turns on, it can create pressure changes and vibration. A vent near the china cabinet could shake the glass. Air movement in my room could disturb dust or vapor. If the nightstand was near a vent or wall, the system might make the remote shift. The event could begin downstairs and continue through the house as the equipment cycled. Neither of us may have noticed the normal hum because we focused on the sharper sounds. The mist could have come from my breath or bedding. Even if the room did not feel freezing, moisture can sometimes become visible in a narrow beam under the right conditions. A humidifier, warm room, cold window, or nearby vent might create light condensation. Steam from another part of the house would be less likely, but not impossible if air circulated through vents. I do not remember any smell, temperature change, or source that would support real fog. That makes dust or hallucination more likely. The feeling of sudden terror also fits a sleep-related experience. People often report an intense sense of danger during nighttime hallucinations. The brain's threat system can activate before conscious reasoning catches up. A vague shape becomes frightening, not because of what it does, but because the body produces certainty that something is wrong. I may have experienced a brief surge of adrenaline after waking suddenly. My heart rate increased. The room felt unfamiliar. The mist became threatening. The more frightened I felt, the more unnatural it appeared. The presence did not need to form a person. My body had already decided it was dangerous. The fact that I ran rather than turning on a light prevented me from identifying it. If I had switched on the lamp, the mist might have disappeared instantly or revealed itself as dust. If I had checked the remote, I might have found it resting at an angle or partly off the nightstand. Fear protected me from a possible threat, but it also preserved the mystery. I left before ordinary details could correct my interpretation. The supernatural explanation is that some kind of presence entered or moved through the house. It first disturbed the china cabinet downstairs, causing the glass to rattle. Then it moved upstairs and entered my room. It touched or shifted the remote to get my attention. When I sat up, I saw it as mist because it had no solid body. The swirling motion represented the shape of the presence gathering over the bed. The sudden terror may have been my reaction to being close to it rather than simple fear. When I ran to my brother, the presence disappeared or moved elsewhere. This explanation gives the two events one cause. It also explains why the mist seemed illuminated despite the darkness, and why the remote sound appeared deliberate. But there is no physical evidence that anything paranormal was present. The mist did not speak, form a figure, or touch me. The remote was not thrown across the room. The cabinet did not break. Nothing followed us. A collection of small household noises and a possible sleep hallucination requires fewer assumptions. Still, the independent experience downstairs remains the detail that prevents me from dismissing everything completely. If my brother had heard nothing, I could say I was half asleep and saw dust. His report created the possibility that the entire house had been affected by something. Even he looked frightened after hearing my story. He had initially ignored the cabinet. Then he realized that both of us had encountered something unusual within a similar period. Fear became shared. Two people validating one another can make an experience feel more certain. But shared fear does not necessarily mean a shared supernatural cause. We may simply have helped each other connect ordinary events. My brother's reaction also may have changed in my memory. He was surprised to see me enter his room terrified. When I told him about the mist, he became uneasy because my fear was convincing. Then he remembered the cabinet. His wide eyes may have reflected concern for me rather than certainty that a ghost was present. At 17 or 18, I might interpret his expression as confirmation because I needed someone else to take the experience seriously. The event remains powerful because it happened at the exact moment between waking and sleep. I was still aware of the room. I had just held the remote in my hand. The television had only recently gone dark. The ordinary world had not fully disappeared. Then, an object seemed to move by itself, and a cloud formed above the bed. It felt less like waking from a dream, and more like watching the room change while I was still inside it. That is what sleep transition experiences often feel like. There is no clear boundary. The person believes they have been awake the entire time. The brain may enter sleep for only seconds, produce vivid imagery, and return to awareness without preserving the moment of falling asleep. The hallucination is then remembered as part of waking reality. I think that is probably what happened to me. I began drifting off much faster than I realized. The remote shifted because the nightstand was uneven or because I moved the bed. The sound woke me partially. My brain, still dreaming, projected a slowly swirling cloud into the beams of streetlight. As I became fully alert, the image grew less stable, but fear made me continue seeing it. I ran before the hallucination faded naturally. Meanwhile, the china cabinet had rattled downstairs for an unrelated reason. That explanation accounts for every detail without requiring a ghost. It is the one I trust most. But the memory still returns with the same atmosphere. The television shuts off. The room becomes silent. I place the remote on the nightstand and roll away. 2 minutes pass. Plastic slides across wood. Something lightly lifts or drops beside me. I sit up, expecting to see my brother. Instead, a pale cloud hangs over the mattress. Streetlight enters through the cracks in the blinds and passes through it. The mist turns slowly inside itself. I watch, trying to decide whether it is smoke, dust, or something my eyes are creating. Then the fear arrives. Not gradual nervousness. A sudden certainty that I should not remain in the room. I run to my brother. He is awake with Final Fantasy on the screen. I tell him what happened. He looks at me differently and says the china cabinet had been shaking downstairs only a short time earlier. Neither of us returns immediately to search for a cause. Nothing happens again. Maybe a truck passed outside. Maybe the house shifted in the cold. Maybe the remote slid because I placed it badly. Maybe I briefly dreamed with my eyes open. Those are all reasonable explanations. But whenever I think about that night, I still see the mist floating above the bed, moving as though it contained a slow current no air in the room could explain. And I remember my brother's expression when he realized the glass downstairs had started rattling before I ever came to tell him that something had entered my room. I was around 11 or 12 years old when this happened. I am 23 now, and I have only told 2 or 3 people about it. The main reason I kept it to myself was simple. I thought people would assume I was lying, exaggerating, or completely crazy. Even now, I understand why someone might doubt the story. If another person described seeing an object that looked like a UFO floating only a few meters above their head, I would probably start searching for a normal explanation too. A balloon, a kite, a remote-controlled toy, some kind of decoration caught in the wind. Anything would seem more likely than an unknown aircraft drifting over 2 children in broad daylight. I have spent years hoping it was something ordinary. The memory has become less detailed with time, but the main image has never completely left me. At the time, I was living in eastern North Carolina. It was summer, probably June or July, and I was visiting one of my aunts with my mother. My aunt lived across the street from a trailer park. I do not remember why I went over there or exactly how I met the other child. He may have lived in the trailer park, or perhaps he was visiting someone there too. I cannot remember his name anymore. That bothers me now, because he was the only other person who saw what I saw. If I remembered his name, I might be able to find him and ask whether he still remembers that day. I would want to know whether his memory matches mine, or whether he has forgotten the whole thing. At the time, none of that seemed important. We were just 2 children playing soccer during a summer afternoon. The day itself felt normal. I do not remember any unusual weather, strange lights, military aircraft, or storms. It was probably warm and humid, the way eastern North Carolina often is in summer. We were kicking the ball back and forth near the trailers. I do not remember whether we had proper goals or were simply using whatever space was available. We may have been playing in a patch of grass or an open area between homes. We had been playing for a while when we heard a faint sound. The sound is one of the hardest parts to describe because so much time has passed. It was not a loud engine. It did not sound like a helicopter, plane, or car. I remember something like air being pushed or cut by a rotating object. There was a soft, repeated motion to it, almost as though something spinning was disturbing the air around it. It may have been a low humming or whirring sound, but I do not want to add details I no longer remember clearly. What I do remember is that the sound made both of us look up. The object was directly above us. It was extremely low. At the time, I believed it was only around 15 to 18 feet above our heads. I cannot prove that distance was accurate. Children are not always good at estimating height, especially when an object is unfamiliar and there is nothing beside it for comparison. Still, it appeared close enough that I could see its shape and colors clearly. It did not look like the typical flying saucer from movies. It was not a flat disc with a dome on top. The closest shape I can describe is 2 ice cream cones joined together at their wide ends, with the pointed ends facing away from each other. That would create a narrow center and 2 points extending in opposite directions. However, the sides were not completely smooth. There were intricate dips, curves, or grooves running from the center toward the points. The surface seemed designed rather than accidental. It looked metallic and shiny, mostly silver in color. Along the sides were green and purple square shapes. At the time, I thought they looked like windows. I do not know whether they were truly transparent. I did not see anyone inside them. They may have been colored panels, stickers, decorations, lights, or reflections. but I remember green and purple squares against the silver body. The object itself seemed to be around 4 feet tall. Again, that measurement is based on a childhood memory. It could have been smaller and closer, or larger and farther away. What made it so strange was the way it moved. It was traveling slowly. It did not rush over us like an aircraft. It floated past at a pace that gave us enough time to stare. At the same time, it was rotating. The rotation did not look smooth. It reminded me of a spinning top when it begins losing speed. A top spins cleanly when it is moving fast, but as it slows, the center becomes unstable and the whole thing starts to wobble. That was how this object appeared. It turned while leaning slightly from side to side, as though it was struggling to remain balanced. It was not falling. It continued floating forward, but the movement looked imperfect. The sound we heard may have come from that rotation. Perhaps the shape was pushing air as it spun, creating the faint whirring noise that first drew our attention. Neither of us spoke while it passed overhead. We simply stared. I do not remember feeling immediate terror. The experience was too strange for my brain to understand quickly. If a large plane had flown that low, I would have known it was dangerous. If a person had appeared in front of us, I would have known to run or call an adult. This object did not fit into any category I understood. It was small enough to seem like a toy, but detailed enough to look like a machine. It was close enough to inspect, but unfamiliar enough that I could not judge its real size. The other child was seeing it too. That mattered. I was not alone looking at the sky and wondering whether I had imagined something. We both stopped playing. We both followed it with our eyes. The object continued moving away from us until it disappeared into or behind some trees. I do not remember it shooting upward, accelerating suddenly, or vanishing in a flash. It simply floated toward the trees and was lost from view. Afterward, the boy and I looked at each other. Neither of us seemed to know what to say. There was no excited shouting. We did not immediately run to find adults. We did not argue about what it was. We just stared at each other with the same confused expression. Then, we left. I do not remember whether we returned to our homes together or went in separate directions. I went back to my aunt's place and did not tell anyone. That decision seems strange now. If I believed I had seen an unknown aircraft floating just above my head, why did I not tell my mother immediately? Children do not always understand the importance of an experience while it is happening. I may have been afraid of being laughed at. I may have already started convincing myself that it was a toy. Perhaps the event felt so unbelievable that saying it aloud seemed embarrassing. I also had no evidence. By the time I returned, the object was gone. I did not have a photograph or video. I did not even know the other child's family well enough to bring him as a witness. I probably imagined an adult asking questions I could not answer. What direction did it come from? How fast was it moving? How large was it exactly? Did it have propellers? Could I identify markings? I would not have known what to say, so I stayed quiet. For years, I assumed it must have been some kind of toy. That remains the explanation I want to believe. A lightweight object could float slowly at low altitude. It could be silver with colored panels. If it rotated unevenly, it might wobble like a top. The faint sound could come from wind passing over its surface or from a small motor. A toy would also explain why it was only a few feet tall and why it disappeared into the trees rather than continuing high into the sky. But I have never been able to identify a toy that matches the shape and movement I remember. Remote-controlled aircraft existed when I was a child. There were model planes, helicopters, blimps, and experimental flying toys. Small radio-controlled helicopters were available, though many were less stable and capable than modern drones. Someone in the trailer park or nearby could have been testing an unusual model. If the propellers were hidden inside the structure, I might not see them from below. A custom-built aircraft could have a metallic body and colored panels. The wobbling might indicate poor balance or weak control. The person operating it could have lost control, allowing it to drift toward the trees. This is a reasonable possibility. The object may have been a remote-controlled blimp or balloon. Some promotional balloons and toys are made from shiny silver material. Mylar reflects sunlight strongly and can look metallic. A balloon with a decorative shape could resemble two cones joined together. The green and purple squares may have been printed designs. Wind could make it rotate and wobble. A small motor or loose material might create a faint sound. If it drifted over us and then became caught in the trees, that would match the movement I remember. A balloon is probably one of the strongest explanations. Distance and size are difficult to judge when looking at objects in the sky. A small balloon only a few feet above us could appear larger and more detailed than it really was. A larger balloon much higher up could seem close because there were no clear reference points. I may have believed it was 15 feet above us when it was actually 50 or 100 feet away. The trees may have provided some comparison, but childhood memory can compress distance. If the object passed behind the trees rather than entering them, it may have been farther away than I thought. The apparent windows might have been patches of color printed onto the balloon. The intricate curves could have been wrinkles or seams in the reflective material. The wobbling rotation would be natural for something carried by wind. A kite is another possibility. Kites come in many unusual shapes, including spinning designs, metallic materials, and three-dimensional structures. A rotating kite can make a faint rushing or whirring sound. The line may have been too thin to see. Someone nearby could have been flying it from behind a trailer, building, or group of trees. The object could pass overhead while remaining controlled by a person outside our view. Its two-cone shape might have been designed to spin in the wind. Green and purple sections could be fabric panels. The dips and curves may have been part of the frame. If it descended behind trees, the person flying it may have been bringing it down. I do not remember seeing a string, but that does not prove there was none. Thin lines are almost invisible against the bright sky. At 11 or 12, I might not have known enough about unusual kites to recognize one. A spinning kite is less exciting than a UFO, but it fits many of the details. There are also wind-driven toys, sometimes called spinners or windsocks. Some are made of reflective material and rotate around a central point. From below, a decorative spinner could resemble a machine. If it broke free from a line, it might drift slowly across the area while turning. The unsteady wobble would make sense if wind controlled it. A weather balloon or scientific instrument seems less likely because the object appeared too small and low, but parts of such equipment can descend after being released. A metallic instrument package beneath a balloon could look unusual. If the balloon itself were transparent or outside my field of attention, I might focus only on the lower object. However, I remember one solid shape floating by itself. A piece of debris may also have created the illusion. Lightweight reflective material can be carried through the air by rising warm currents. A folded emergency blanket, insulation, party decoration, or metallic packaging could rotate slowly. As it folded and unfolded, it might appear to have grooves, points, and colored squares. The sound could come from the material flapping. But the object seemed too structured. I remember a definite symmetrical form, not a piece of rubbish changing shape. Memory may have improved the symmetry over time. The brain often simplifies unfamiliar objects into organized forms. Perhaps I saw a complicated bundle turning in the air and later described it as two joined cones, because that was the closest shape I could name. The green and purple squares may also have become more vivid in memory. I believe those colors were present, but I cannot guarantee their exact shade, number, or arrangement. I do not remember how many squares there were. I cannot say whether they were on both sides or only one. I cannot recall whether they glowed or simply reflected sunlight. The smaller details have faded. That is one reason I hesitate to make a strong claim about what we saw. Memory from childhood is not a recording. Each time I have thought about the object, I have reconstructed it from the details that remained. The central image may be accurate while some features changed. The shape, height, and colors could be slightly different from the original. The other child's presence makes the experience more convincing to me, but even that has limits. We were standing beside each other and influenced by the same visual conditions. If one of us said or implied that the object looked like a UFO, the other might adopt the same interpretation. I do not remember which of us reacted first. We may not have discussed its shape until afterward. It is possible we both saw an unusual kite and became confused because neither recognized it. Two witnesses can make the same mistake, especially when observing the same unfamiliar object from the same position. Still, I remember the silent look we exchanged after it disappeared. It felt like confirmation. We had both seen something unusual enough that neither of us knew how to respond. A military explanation is possible because North Carolina has several military installations and training areas. Aircraft sometimes travel at low altitude. Experimental drones and target devices may have existed even then. A small, unmanned object could have been used for testing. Its metallic surface, unusual shape, and colored panels might belong to specialized equipment. The wobbling movement could indicate damage or loss of control. If it was only 4 feet tall, it would be closer to a drone or instrument than a crewed aircraft. However, I do not remember any obvious propellers, wings, exhaust, or loud engine. Military equipment flying 15 feet over children near homes would also create serious safety concerns. It seems unlikely, though not impossible. A conventional helicopter or plane does not fit the description. The object was too small, too quiet, and too slow. It did not have a recognizable fuselage or wings. A bird also seems impossible, although birds can look strange when carrying objects or viewed at unusual angles. No bird would appear metallic with geometric green and purple panels. The supernatural or extraterrestrial interpretation is the most dramatic. Perhaps the object was an unknown craft observing the area. Its small size could mean it was a probe rather than a vehicle carrying people. The colored squares may have been sensors or windows. The rotating motion might provide lift or stabilization. Its wobble could mean it was damaged, scanning, or moving slowly on purpose. It flew close because it was studying the ground or the two of us. Then it entered the trees and disappeared. That explanation fits the object as I remember it, but it has no supporting evidence. There were no photographs. No marks were left on the ground. No adults reported seeing it. There was no missing time, physical effect, or later encounter. The object behaved like a drifting, lightweight toy more than an advanced spacecraft. If an extraterrestrial civilization could cross enormous distances, it seems strange that its probe would wobble through a trailer park like a top about to fall over. Of course, unfamiliar technology might move in ways that look unstable to us. But that argument can be used to explain anything, which makes it weak. The term UFO only means an unidentified flying object. In that limited sense, I did see a UFO because I could not identify it. That does not mean it came from another planet. It may have been a toy I had never seen before. It may have been a balloon, kite, spinner, or custom remote-controlled craft. The mystery comes from my lack of information. not proof of an extraordinary origin. The time period matters too. I do not remember the exact year, but if I was 11 or 12 and I am 23 now, it would have been more than a decade ago. Modern consumer drones were not as common or advanced as they are today, but remote-controlled flying devices still existed. People built custom models long before small camera drones became popular. A strange homemade craft could look far ahead of what a child expected to see. The trailer park setting may have included someone interested in model aviation. They might launch devices from an open area. The object could have come from a nearby home without us knowing. It may have crashed into the trees, and the owner later recovered it. I sometimes imagine finding an old photograph or advertisement showing the exact toy. That would be a relief. I would rather discover that the object was a failed flying spinner sold in stores than continue wondering. The shape seems distinctive enough that I feel I should have found something similar by now. But memory may not be accurate enough for a perfect match. My description of two-joined ice cream cones could represent many objects: a spinning Christmas ornament, a decorative balloon, a wind turbine toy, a kite, a piece of reflective packaging twisted around itself. Something ordinary may look completely different when floating overhead. The experience also happened during summer, when heat can affect vision. Warm air rising from the ground creates distortion. An object seen through moving air may appear to wobble, bend, or shift shape. The rotating instability I remember could partly come from heat shimmer. Bright sunlight reflecting off silver material might hide fine details and create colored reflections. Green from trees and purple from some nearby object could appear on its surface. What looked like square windows may have been reflections changing as the object turned. The sound may have come from somewhere else. A lawnmower, fan, distant vehicle, insect, or rotating equipment could produce a faint air pushing noise. Because we looked up and saw the object at the same moment, we connected the sound to it. The object may have been silent. The sound simply directed our attention upward. This is another example of how the brain combines separate events. A strange noise occurs. An object is visible. The sound must belong to the object. That conclusion feels natural, but may be wrong. The memory has become hazier with age. I no longer remember the child's name. I cannot picture the exact trailer or where we stood. I do not know the direction the object came from or how long it remained visible. I cannot remember whether the sky was completely clear. I wish I had told my mother immediately. She might have looked outside and seen it. She might remember another child reporting a strange toy lost in the trees. Perhaps someone would have known exactly what it was. By staying silent, I allowed the event to become a private memory with no way to verify it. I think the most likely explanation is that we saw an unusual balloon, kite, or remote-controlled toy. The low altitude, small size, slow speed, rotation, wobbling movement, and disappearance near trees all fit a lightweight, human-made object. The metallic silver surface and colored panels could be decorative material. The sound may have come from wind or a small motor. Our childhood estimates of distance and size may have been inaccurate. That explanation requires no unknown technology. It is the one I hope is true. But the image remains strange. I remember looking up and seeing the object almost directly above us. It seemed close enough that I could study the curves along its body. The two pointed ends faced away from the narrow center. Green and purple squares marked the shiny silver sides. It rotated slowly, but not cleanly. Each turn carried a slight wobble, like a top running out of energy. It drifted over us without any visible wings, strings, or propellers. The other child saw it too. We stopped playing soccer and watched until it floated into the trees. Then we looked at each other. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us claimed it was a plane, Neither of us ran after it. We simply left, each carrying the same unanswered question. Maybe there was a string I could not see. Maybe someone nearby was controlling it. Maybe it was a silver balloon twisting in the summer air. Those explanations are more believable than a spacecraft. Still, I sometimes return to the way it appeared from below. Not far away in the sky. Not a point of light. Not something seen for half a second. A small, detailed object passed slowly over two children in daylight, low enough that we could hear it moving through the air. Then it wobbled toward the trees and disappeared before either of us thought to call an adult. The strongest detail is that the figure did not vanish somewhere vague. It turned into your own lit garage, and you reached it seconds later to find every possible hiding place empty. I'm keeping the long downhill walk, your instinct to stay 2 houses back, and your mother's immediate response through Jamaican beliefs about duppies at the center. When I was around 13 or 14, I was walking home from a friend's house late one summer evening. Our neighborhood was built on a hill. My house was the second one from the bottom, while my friend lived closer to the top. The road sloped down through rows of houses, driveways, lawns, and narrow gaps between properties. It was the kind of neighborhood where most people knew one another, or at least recognized the local children and teenagers. We were always cutting through yards to get from one street to another. Instead of walking all the way around the block, someone would slip between 2 houses, cross a garden, and appear on the next road. It was so common that seeing someone emerge from the darkness between 2 properties was not automatically suspicious. That evening, it was late enough that the street had become empty. The summer air was still warm, but the houses were quiet. Most people were inside. There were no children playing outside, no neighbors talking from porches, and almost no traffic. I was walking alone down the hill toward home. At about the halfway point, I noticed someone step out from the shadows between 2 yards. The figure entered the street ahead of me and began walking downhill in the same direction I was going. At first, I did not think much of it. The person could have been another teenager taking a shortcut. They may have come from a friend's house, just as I had. There was nothing unusual about someone using the space between 2 homes instead of the pavement. Still, something about the figure made me uneasy. I could not identify exactly why. The person had not threatened me, looked back, or changed direction. They simply walked ahead at a steady pace. But from the moment I saw them, I felt that I should not get too close. I decided to maintain a distance of about 2 houses between us. If they slowed down, I slowed down. If they continued at the same pace, I matched them without allowing the gap to close. I watched them carefully. The figure never turned around. That was strange because the street was so quiet that they should have heard me walking behind them. My footsteps would have carried clearly in the empty road. Even if they were not concerned, most people would glance back at least once after hearing someone behind them for several minutes. This person did not. They kept walking at the same steady pace, facing forward the entire time. I could not make out many details. The light was poor, and I was more focused on maintaining distance than studying their clothing or face. I remember the person mainly as a dark figure. They looked solid enough to be human. They moved like someone walking normally down a hill. There was no obvious limp, unnatural posture, or sudden movement. Nothing about them should have been frightening. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. As we moved closer to the bottom of the hill, I began thinking about my house. It was common for people in our neighborhood to leave their garage doors open, especially if someone was home or expected to return soon. I had left ours open when I went to my friend's house. Before leaving, however, I had locked the door inside the garage that led into the house. Someone could enter the garage, but they should not have been able to get into the living area. My mother had returned home by then. As I got closer, I could see the garage light was on. She had probably switched it on so I would not come home to a completely dark entrance. The open garage looked bright compared with the street. I was still about 3 houses away when the person ahead reached my driveway. I expected them to continue down the hill. There was no reason for them to turn. They had shown no interest in me or in any other house. Instead, the figure suddenly turned right. It began walking briskly up my driveway. The change in speed was immediate. The person had been moving steadily, almost casually. But now, they seemed to have a purpose. They went straight into my open garage. For 1 second, I stood there, trying to understand what I had just seen. Then, the obvious explanation hit me. Someone was trying to rob us. They may have seen the garage door open and assumed the house was easy to enter. They could be searching for tools, bicycles, or anything else worth taking. Worse, they might try the door leading into the house and discover my mother inside. The caution I had felt during the walk disappeared beneath panic. I ran. I sprinted the final distance down the hill and up the driveway. Only a few seconds had passed since the person entered the garage. There was no way they could have come back out without passing me. I had kept my eyes on the driveway as I approached. They had to be inside. I rushed into the garage, prepared to find someone hiding, trying the door, or moving around my mother's car. The garage was empty. My mother's car was parked there. The light was on. There was no person standing near the walls or beside the vehicle. For a moment, I thought they must have already entered the house. I ran to the interior door and checked it. It was still locked. The lock had not been forced. The person could not have gone through it. I looked around again. The garage was not large enough for someone to disappear easily. I checked through the car windows in case they had somehow climbed inside. The doors appeared closed, and there was nobody in the seats. I bent down and looked underneath the car. Nothing. I checked the areas beside it and the corners of the garage. There was nowhere else to hide. The person was gone. That made no sense. I had watched them turn into the driveway. I had seen them enter the garage. I had run directly after them. They could not have left through the main opening because I would have seen them coming toward me. They could not have entered the house because the door was locked. They could not be inside or underneath the car. There was no second exit that would explain how they escaped. I unlocked the interior door and hurried into the house. My mother was sitting in the living room watching television. She looked completely calm. Nothing in the house appeared disturbed. I asked her whether anyone had come inside. She looked at me as though the question made no sense. No one had knocked. No one had entered through the garage. She had not heard the door being tested or anyone moving around outside. I told her what had happened. I explained that I had followed someone down the hill, watched them turn into our driveway, and seen them enter the garage only seconds before I arrived. I told her I had checked the car, the floor, and the locked door. There was no one there. My mother did not laugh at me. My family is Jamaican, and beliefs about spirits were part of the way we understood strange experiences. In Jamaican folklore, a duppy is a spirit or ghost, often connected to the dead. People may describe duppies as appearing on roads, near homes, or in isolated places. Depending on the story, they can mislead, frighten, follow, or disturb the living. My mother immediately took what I had seen seriously. She stopped what she was doing. That same night, she saged the house and prayed over it. Her reaction made the experience feel even more real to me. If she had laughed and said I had followed a neighbor, I might have questioned myself more quickly. Instead, she treated the figure as something that might have followed me home. I was already frightened by the empty garage. Now I began wondering whether I had allowed a spirit to cross into our property. The idea that it had entered the open garage felt significant. The garage was the only part of the house left exposed. The main doors were locked, but the large garage door stood open, like an invitation. The figure had walked directly into that opening and vanished. For a long time, I considered it a possible duppy. The sequence felt too deliberate to be random. The figure appeared from between 2 yards while I was alone. It walked ahead of me without looking back. It maintained the same route all the way down the hill. Then, when it reached my house, it turned and entered. It did not choose another open driveway. It chose mine, but there are ordinary explanations. The first possibility is that the person never actually entered the garage. From 3 houses away, in poor light, I may have misjudged their movement. They could have turned into the driveway and then continued along the edge of the property, passed behind a car or bush, or cut through the side yard. Because the garage was brightly lit, the contrast between light and darkness may have made the figure difficult to track. My eyes were adjusted to the dark street. When the person crossed in front of the garage light, their outline may have disappeared briefly. I interpreted that disappearance as them going inside. In reality, they may have moved beside the garage or between houses. By the time I reached the driveway, they were already out of sight. This is one of the strongest explanations. Visual perception at night is unreliable, especially at a distance. I saw someone turn toward the house. My mind completed the route and decided they entered the garage. I then ran while focused on the entrance, perhaps missing movement through the darker side of the property. The figure could have been an ordinary neighbor taking another shortcut. There may have been a path beside our house that I did not consider in the panic of the moment. If they knew the neighborhood well, they could move quickly through the yard. They may not have realized I believed they were breaking in. The person could also have entered the garage and left before I arrived. Although I remember watching the driveway, running changes attention. I was looking at the ground enough to avoid falling on the hill. My head and body were moving. For a second or two, the person might have stepped back out, crossed behind me, or moved along the side of the garage while I focused on reaching the entrance. Fear creates the impression that we watched something continuously, but the eyes blink and attention shifts. A few seconds are enough for someone familiar with the property to hide or escape. The garage may have contained spaces I did not search as thoroughly as I remember. There could have been shelving, stored items, bins, or narrow areas beside the car. At 13 or 14, I may have looked quickly, rather than conducting a complete search. Someone could crouch behind an object, wait for me to enter the house, and leave afterward. That would be dangerous and unusual, but physically possible. However, I remember checking every place that seemed capable of hiding a person. The garage felt completely empty. Another possibility is that the person entered the car. I looked through the windows, but reflections from the garage light can make interiors difficult to see. A person crouched on the floor or behind a seat might be hidden. If one of the car doors had been unlocked, they could climb inside, wait until I went into the house, and escape. I do not remember checking each handle or opening the boot. But this explanation would require a stranger to choose a risky hiding place inside an occupied home's garage for no obvious reason. Nothing was stolen, and no one was found later. The person might also have been someone my mother knew. They could have entered through another route or left before I arrived, though my mother denied that anyone had come inside. There is no reason to think she was hiding anything from me. A more likely possibility is that the figure was not a person at all. Low light can turn many objects into a human silhouette. A moving shadow from a car, animal, branch, or shifting light could appear to step out between houses. As I walked downhill, my own position relative to streetlights changed. A shadow projected onto fences, lawns, or walls might seem to move ahead of me. Because the road sloped, the shape could maintain a consistent distance. When it reached the bright area near my driveway, the shadow changed direction or disappeared. My brain interpreted it as a person entering the garage. This could explain why the figure never looked back. A shadow has no reason to react to footsteps. It simply moves according to its light source. However, I remember the figure walking with a steady human pace. I did not see a flat shadow sliding across the ground or wall. It appeared to be a solid person traveling down the street. An animal might also look human from a distance, especially if it moved near fences or landscaping. A large dog, deer, or other animal could emerge between yards and travel ahead. But the figure seemed upright and entered the driveway in a way I understood as walking. A person remains more likely than an animal. The hill itself may have distorted distance. When walking downhill, objects can appear closer or farther depending on streetlights, parked cars, and the slope. I thought I maintained a 2-house gap, but the real distance may have varied. The figure might have reached the driveway much earlier than I realized. That would give them more time to move out of sight before I arrived. My estimate that only a few seconds passed may also be inaccurate. Fear compresses time. The run from 3 houses away could take longer than it feels in memory. If I stopped briefly, hesitated, or slowed at the road, the person had enough time to cross the garage and exit elsewhere. There is also the possibility of mistaken identity combined with expectation. I may have seen a local teenager enter a nearby driveway, not mine. Because my garage light was bright and I was approaching home, I assumed the turn happened at my property. Similar houses and driveways on a dark street can blend together. When I reached my own garage and found it empty, I believed the person had vanished. They may have entered the house next door, or the one above ours. From a distance on a slope, property boundaries are not always obvious. I remember being about 3 houses away, which leaves room for that kind of error. The lit garage would draw my attention and make it seem like the destination. But I felt certain the figure turned directly into our driveway. The person's refusal to look back may not have been strange at all. People often hear footsteps behind them and choose not to react, especially teenagers trying to appear confident. They may have been aware of me and intentionally avoided looking because they did not want an interaction. They may have known I was a neighborhood child and felt no concern. My own caution gave their normal behavior a threatening quality. Once I began watching them closely, every lack of reaction seemed suspicious. The feeling of danger may have come from instinct, but instinct is not always supernatural. The person may have moved in a way I subconsciously recognized as unusual. Perhaps they wore clothing that concealed their identity, walked too quietly, or changed pace in small ways I no longer remember. My brain noticed something before I could explain it and encouraged me to stay back. It is also possible I was simply nervous because the street was dark and empty. A lone figure ahead naturally becomes a focus. The safest choice was to keep distance, and my body made that decision before I consciously felt afraid. My mother's reaction also shaped the way I remembered the event. Because she immediately saged and prayed over the house, the possibility of a duppy became part of the story that same night. The empty garage was no longer only a visual mystery. It became evidence of a spirit. Cultural beliefs influence how people interpret unexplained experiences, especially when they are young. If I had grown up in a family that dismissed ghosts entirely, I might remember the event as an unknown person escaping through the yard. Because my family believed in duppies, the supernatural explanation felt available and serious. That does not mean the belief caused the experience. It affected the meaning I gave it afterward. Saging and praying may have helped us regain a sense of safety. Whether or not anything had entered the garage, my mother took action. She did not leave me feeling alone or foolish. She treated the fear as something worth addressing. That response probably helped me sleep, even though it also made the figure seem more real. A psychological explanation is that I experienced a brief dissociation or visual hallucination. People can occasionally see figures that are not present, especially when tired, stressed, dehydrated, or walking in low light. The figure may have been generated by my brain and remained stable for several minutes as I walked, but a sustained hallucination that moved consistently through a familiar street would be less common than simple misidentification. There is no indication that I regularly saw things or experienced similar episodes. The event is better explained by an ordinary person or shadow whose final movement I misread. The supernatural interpretation, however, is the one that fits the emotional pattern most strongly. In Jamaican tradition, duppies are often described as appearing at night and behaving almost like people until something reveals they are not. A duppy may walk a familiar road, follow someone, or lead them toward a particular place. It may disappear when approached or enter a space without using ordinary doors. The figure ahead of me did not float or change shape. It behaved normally until it reached my home. Then it entered the garage and ceased to exist. Perhaps it had been waiting between the yards. Maybe it allowed me to follow at a safe distance because its destination was never the bottom of the hill. Its destination was my house. The open garage may have given it a way in. My mother's prayers and cleansing might then have prevented anything further from happening. That interpretation explains why I never found a person and why the figure chose my driveway. But it raises questions. Why would a spirit need an open garage? Why walk ahead of me rather than follow behind? Why enter the property and then do nothing? There were no later disturbances that I connect with the incident. No doors opened. No objects moved. No one in the family saw the figure again. If it was a duppy, its purpose remains unknown. The lack of later activity supports an ordinary explanation. A real person escaped. A shadow vanished under new lighting. A frightened teenager misjudged a turn. The house was safe, and nothing followed me inside. Still, the event remains difficult to dismiss because of the geography. I knew my street. I knew which driveway belonged to my house. I knew the shape of the garage and the position of my mother's car. The person did not disappear far away in darkness. They entered a brightly lit, enclosed space that I reached moments later. That gave me a clear place to search. And the place was empty. If someone tells a story about a figure vanishing around a corner, there are countless escape routes. This person seemed to walk into a dead end. The locked interior door is another detail that matters. If it had been open, I could assume they entered the house. I might believe my mother failed to notice, or the intruder escaped through another door, but I had personally locked it before leaving. It remained locked when I returned. The figure had no route forward. The open garage door was the only obvious route in or out, and I was approaching through it. The car provided the only large hiding place. I checked inside and underneath it. No one was there. The most likely reconstruction is that the figure turned beside or just before the garage rather than entering it. The lighting erased their outline, and they slipped through a side yard or neighboring property. From my position, 3 houses away, I interpreted their path incorrectly. I ran to the wrong destination and searched an empty garage. My mother's cultural beliefs then gave the mistake a supernatural meaning. That explanation is sensible. It requires only darkness, distance, a sloped road, and a person using the same yard shortcuts everyone in the neighborhood used. It may be exactly what happened. But when I remember the walk, the figure does not drift vaguely toward the houses. I see it clearly enough. It emerges from the shadows between 2 yards. It begins walking downhill ahead of me. I keep 2 houses between us because something inside me says not to get closer. The person never turns around. Their pace remains steady until my lit garage comes into view. Then they reach my driveway. Without hesitation, they turn right. They walk faster. They enter the garage. I run. The light fills the entire space when I arrive. My mother's car sits where it always does. The door to the house is locked. There is no one behind the car, inside it, or underneath it. There is nobody walking away down the street. I unlock the door and find my mother watching television, unaware that anyone has approached the house. When I tell her, she does not tell me I imagined it. She gets up, sages the house, and begins to pray. Maybe a local teenager cut through the side yard. Maybe the hill and garage light distorted what I saw. Maybe the person entered the neighboring property and my memory fixed the turn at our driveway. Those explanations are more likely than a spirit. But I still remember how carefully I kept my distance long before anything impossible happened. Nothing had threatened me yet. The figure had not turned or spoken. Still, some part of me seemed to understand that I should not walk too close behind it. And when it finally reached the bottom of the hill, it did not continue past my house like an ordinary stranger. It turned into the one open entrance, crossed into the light, and disappeared before I could follow it inside.
We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.
I was 8 years old when this happened, and at that age I had a lot of trouble sleeping alone in my own bedroom. We lived in a townhouse that was already close to 100 years old. It had the kind of age you could hear. The floors creaked in different places depending on where you stepped. The walls sometimes made small popping sounds at night. Pipes knocked. Doors shifted slightly in their frames when the temperature changed. During the day, those noises were easy to ignore. At night, every sound seemed connected to something moving through the house. My bedroom was close to my mother's room. It could not have been more than 10 steps from one doorway to the other. Knowing she was nearby should have made me feel safe, but sometimes it was not enough. I would lie awake, listening to the floorboards, trying to decide whether the sounds came from the house settling or from someone walking in the hallway. One night, I woke suddenly. I looked at the clock and saw that it was 2:34 in the morning. That time has stayed in my memory because I remember staring at the numbers before I got out of bed. The house was dark and quiet, and I already knew I was not going to be able to fall back asleep alone. I climbed out of bed and crossed the short hallway to my mother's room. The floor creaked beneath me in the places I expected it to. I knew those sounds well enough that they did not frighten me. They almost helped, because they reminded me that I was still inside the same familiar house. I went to my mother's side of the bed and woke her. I asked whether I could sleep with her. She answered in a tired voice and said yes. She barely seemed awake. I walked around to the other side of the bed, climbed in beside her, pulled the covers over myself, and fell asleep again. At some point later in the night, I woke because I badly needed to use the bathroom. The urge was strong enough that I sat up immediately. I was prepared to climb out of bed and hurry to the toilet. Then I saw someone standing beside my mother. The figure looked like an old woman. She had pale or white skin and curly red hair. Her hair was unlike anything I expected to see in the middle of the night. It framed her face in thick curls and stood out clearly in the dim room. She held a dark brown book in front of her. The book looked old and heavy, though I cannot remember whether I saw any writing or symbols on the cover. She had it open and appeared to be reading from it. A faint orange light surrounded her. The light did not seem to come from a lamp or candle. It radiated from the woman herself, or from the space around her. It was not bright enough to fill the whole bedroom, but it made her visible. My mother was still asleep. The woman stood over her, looking down at the open book and whispering. I could not understand the words. Her voice was low and steady, as though she were reciting something she had read many times before. She also had wings. I do not remember every detail of them. I cannot say whether they were made of white feathers, light, or something else. I only remember knowing that they were wings and that they belonged to her. For several seconds, I stared. I had been desperate to use the bathroom, but I forgot about it completely. The woman continued reading over my mother's sleeping body. At first, she did not seem to notice that I was awake. I was too frightened to speak. She had not attacked either of us. She had not reached toward me or made any threatening movement. But there was something deeply disturbing about waking in the middle of the night and finding a glowing stranger standing beside the bed. Even if she looked like an angel, I did not feel calm. I felt terrified. Then she looked at me. Her eyes moved away from the book and met mine. I froze. She raised one finger to her lips. "Shh," she said. Her voice was quiet. She did not sound angry. She did not warn me to leave or tell me not to look. It seemed more like she was asking me not to wake my mother. After saying it, she lowered her hand and returned her attention to the book. She began whispering again. As she did, I slowly sank back beneath the covers. I did not decide to lie down. It felt as though sleep came over me immediately. One moment I was sitting upright, staring at the woman. The next, my body was lowering into the bed. I pulled the covers around myself and fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke again, it was morning. Sunlight was coming through the windows. Birds were chirping outside. My mother was awake or beginning to wake beside me, and the room looked completely normal. The old woman was gone. There was no orange glow, no dark brown book, no wings. Nothing in the bedroom suggested that anyone else had been there. The strangest physical detail was that I no longer needed to use the bathroom. When I woke during the night, the urge had felt urgent. I had been certain I needed to go immediately. But in the morning, the feeling was gone. I had not wet the bed. I had no memory of getting up and using the toilet. As far as I knew, I had simply fallen asleep again. I told my mother what I had seen. She said the woman was an angel. That answer may have been meant to comfort me. From my mother's perspective, I had described a winged figure standing beside her, reading softly from a book and surrounded by warm light. The woman had not harmed anyone. She had only asked me to be quiet and allowed me to return to sleep. An angel was a natural interpretation, but the experience did not feel comforting to me. It was the scariest moment of my childhood. Perhaps that sounds strange. People usually imagine angels as peaceful, beautiful, and protective. They are supposed to bring reassurance. But waking to find any unknown figure beside the bed is frightening, no matter how gentle the figure appears. The woman was inside a locked home in the middle of the night. She was standing over my sleeping mother. She was whispering words I could not understand. Then, she noticed me and seemed able to make me fall asleep. Nothing about that felt ordinary. For years, I wondered who she was. If she truly was an angel, was she watching over my mother? Was she reading a prayer? Was the book connected to my mother's life, health, or future? Had she been there before I woke? Would she have stayed longer if I had not seen her? I also wondered why she looked like an old woman with curly red hair. Was that her real appearance? Or did she choose a form that a child could understand? The question that remained strongest was whether I could ever see or speak to her again. Part of me wanted answers. Another part of me never wanted to wake and find her beside the bed again. There are ordinary explanations for the experience. The most likely is that I experienced a vivid sleep-related hallucination. I had woken during the night, walked into my mother's room, and fallen asleep again. Later, I woke once more, while still partly dreaming. During the transition between sleep and wakefulness, the brain can place dream images into a real room. A person may see figures standing beside the bed, faces in corners, animals, shadows, lights, or people who are not actually there. These experiences are called hypnopompic hallucinations when they happen while waking. They can feel completely real. The person may be able to sit up, look around, and recognize the room. The hallucination appears to exist inside the same physical space. The old woman may have been part of a dream that continued after I opened my eyes. My mother's bedroom was real. The bed was real. My mother was genuinely sleeping beside me. But the woman, the book, the light, and the wings may have been dream imagery layered over the scene. That would explain why the figure disappeared by morning without leaving evidence. It would also explain why I fell asleep so suddenly after she told me to be quiet. I may never have been fully awake. The moment she said shh could have been the point where I slipped back into deeper sleep. My sensation of being gently forced down beneath the covers may have been my body relaxing while the dream continued. The urgent need to urinate may also have come from the dream. Sometimes physical sensations become exaggerated during sleep. A slightly full bladder can create a powerful dream urge without requiring immediate action. By morning, the pressure may have decreased or simply felt less urgent. It is also possible that I briefly used the bathroom and did not remember. Children can wake, walk, and return to bed while only partly conscious. I may have gone to the toilet after the experience, then forgotten because I was still half asleep. However, I remember falling back beneath the covers almost immediately after the woman's warning. That memory may not preserve the full sequence. There could have been a gap. Another possibility is that the figure was created by objects and shadows in the room. A chair, hanging clothes, curtain, or piece of furniture may have formed the shape of a person. The dim orange glow could have come from a street light, night light, clock, or light outside the house. Red or brown fabric might appear like curly hair. A book-shaped object could have been something on a shelf or bedside table. The wings might have been curtains, blankets, a headboard, or patterns on the wall. Because I was 8 and frightened, my mind could have combined these shapes into one complete figure. However, I remember the woman moving. She turned to look at me. She raised her finger. She spoke. That makes a simple stationary shadow less likely, though not impossible if the movement belonged to a dream. The house's age may have influenced the experience, too. I was already uneasy in old rooms at night. The creaking floors and unfamiliar sounds made me expect a presence. When I woke in my mother's bed, the lighting and furniture may have looked different from my own room. My brain was trying to understand the shapes quickly. A dream supplied the old woman. The appearance of the figure may also have come from images I had seen before. Religious books, paintings, church decorations, television shows, or family stories may have shown winged figures holding books or praying over sleeping people. The red hair and orange glow may have come from a completely unrelated memory. Dreams combine fragments without explaining their source. A face from one person, hair from another, wings from a picture, and a book from a story can become one convincing character. The woman's whispering may have come from a real sound. My mother may have been breathing, talking in her sleep, or making quiet noises. A television or radio could have been playing somewhere in the house. Pipes may have hissed. The old townhouse could produce soft, repeating sounds inside the walls. My dreaming brain may have interpreted those noises as a woman reading aloud. When I spoke or moved, my mother might have made a quiet shh sound in her sleep. That sound then became part of the figure. In this reconstruction, the woman did not independently speak. My mother, still half asleep, may have told me to be quiet without waking. The dream image raised its finger and repeated the sound. This explanation accounts for one of the most vivid moments. My mother may not remember doing it because she was asleep. There is also the possibility that my mother briefly woke and tried to calm me. Perhaps I sat up frightened, and she whispered shh while guiding me back under the covers. My dream transformed her voice into the old woman's gesture. By morning, I remembered the interaction as belonging to the figure. Children can merge real people and dream characters during confused awakenings. The woman's appearance as an angel may have been influenced by my mother's explanation afterward. I remembered wings before telling her, but other details may have become clearer after she used the word angel. Once an adult labels an experience, the child's memory can organize itself around that label. The warm orange glow becomes heavenly light. The whispering becomes prayer. The dark book becomes scripture. The old woman becomes a guardian. This does not mean the memory was invented. It means the interpretation may have grown over time. The supernatural explanation is that the woman truly was an angel or protective spirit. She may have been watching over my mother while she slept. The book could have contained prayers, names, records, or words connected to protection. Her whispering may have been a blessing. The orange light could have been part of her presence. When she saw me awake, she asked for silence because she did not want my mother disturbed. Then she caused me to fall asleep so she could continue whatever she was doing. If that interpretation is correct, her behavior does not seem hostile. She did not frighten me intentionally. She did not threaten or touch me. She acknowledged me calmly. She may even have helped me sleep. The fact that I woke safely in the morning supports the idea of a protective presence rather than a dangerous one. Some religious traditions describe angels as beings that can appear in human form. They are not always young, beautiful, or dressed in white. An old woman with red hair could be one form. The book might represent knowledge, judgment, prayer, or a record of someone's life. The wings make the religious interpretation obvious, but wings also appear in dreams because people learn early that angels are supposed to have them. There is no way to identify the figure from the description alone. Even within religious belief, there would be no reliable method to know her name or purpose. Trying to summon or contact an unknown presence would not be wise. If the experience was a sleep hallucination, attempts to recreate it could increase anxiety and disturb sleep. If someone believes it was spiritual, there is still no guarantee that anything responding would be the same figure. The safest way to engage with the memory would be through personal reflection, prayer, or speaking with a trusted religious leader who does not pressure or frighten anyone. Directly attempting to call the figure back could create more fear than understanding. Part of me once thought that if she was an angel, I should want to see her again. But I remember how terrified I was. Her appearance may have been gentle, Yet my body understood her as something completely outside the normal world. I screamed during other childhood fears. This time, I did not scream. I only stared. Perhaps the woman's presence was calming me. Perhaps I was too frightened to react. The silence between us felt powerful. She noticed me. She knew I could see her. Then she asked me not to interfere. That is the part that makes the event feel more like an encounter than a dream. The figure did not behave randomly. She had a purpose before I woke. She was reading over my mother. When I noticed her, she responded in a way that fit the situation. Then, she returned to what she was doing. Dream characters can behave intelligently, but this one seemed independent of me. She did not appear because I called for her. She was already there. I interrupted her. At least, that is how the memory feels. The old house may also have had a history I knew nothing about. A woman might once have lived there. She could have been connected to the bedroom, the family, or someone who had died in the house. The wings might have been my child's interpretation of clothing, curtains, or light around a spirit. The dark book could have been a prayer book. Perhaps she was not an angel, but the ghost of a woman who prayed for people in the house. There is no evidence for this. I do not know of any former resident matching the description. Without records or repeated sightings, it remains speculation. The fact that I never saw her again is important. If she were attached to the house, I might expect another appearance. If she were protecting my mother, perhaps she came only once because that was the only time she was needed. If she were a dream figure, one appearance is exactly what we would expect. Most sleep hallucinations are isolated. They happen under a particular combination of fatigue, stress, sleeping position, and brain activity, then never return. I was also sleeping in a different bed than usual. I'd awakened once, moved rooms, and fallen asleep beside another person. Interrupted sleep increases the chance of vivid dreams and confused awakenings. The timing around 2:34 in the morning places the event in a period when the brain could move between sleep stages several times. I do not know how long I had been asleep in my mother's bed before the second awakening. It may have been only minutes. My brain could still have been carrying the fear that drove me from my own room. The angel-like woman may have been created as both frightening and protective. She was terrifying to look at, but positioned beside my mother, the person I had gone to for safety. She told me to sleep. The dream may have been resolving my fear by creating a guardian, though my child's mind made the guardian strange enough to remain frightening. The red curly hair stands out because it is not the feature most people would invent when describing an angel. But dreams often include oddly specific details. Perhaps I knew an older woman with similar hair. Maybe I had seen one in a book or on television. The color could have come from the orange light around her. Pale hair under warm light might appear red. Details can shift when remembered years later. The dark brown book also makes sense as a dream object. Books suggest authority and hidden information. A child sees an unknown person reading from a book and assumes the words have power. The whispers over my mother made it seem like a ritual or prayer. That interpretation may have been present from the beginning. What troubles me most is the disappearance of my need to use the bathroom. I sat up because the urge was strong. After the woman told me to be quiet, I fell asleep immediately. In the morning, there was no accident and no urgent need. This could be completely normal. The sensation may have been part of the dream. I may have misread another physical discomfort as bladder pressure, or I may have used the bathroom without forming a memory. It does not prove the woman changed anything in my body. Still, as a child, it felt as though she had placed me back to sleep so completely that even the reason I woke no longer mattered. My mother's answer gave me one way to carry the memory. She said it was an angel. That allowed me to believe the figure was there for a good reason. But it did not remove the fear. An angel was still something impossible standing inside the bedroom. Even a protective being would mean that the world contained creatures able to enter locked houses, watch people sleep, and make children lose consciousness with a gesture. That idea did not comfort me. It made the night feel much larger and stranger than before. I think the most likely explanation is that I experienced a vivid waking dream. I woke in my mother's bed while still partly asleep. The room's shadows, a real sound from my mother, and images from my memory combined into the old woman. She appeared to read, whisper, turn, and speak, because my dreaming brain created a complete scene. When she told me to be quiet, I returned to normal sleep. The experience felt real because I was looking at the actual bedroom. That explanation accounts for everything without requiring a supernatural visitor. It is the explanation I would probably give if another person told me the same story. But the memory has never felt like a normal dream. I remember the exact beginning. I sit up because I have to use the bathroom. My mother sleeps beside me. A pale old woman with red curls stands over her. A dark brown book rests open in her hands. Orange light glows faintly around her body. Her wings rise behind her. She whispers words I cannot understand. Then she realizes I am watching. She lifts one finger to her mouth. Shh. The sound is quiet, but clear. She returns to the book. My body sinks beneath the covers. Sleep takes me before I can call for my mother or ask who she is. Morning arrives with sunlight and birds. The room is empty. I do not need the bathroom anymore. My mother listens to the story and tells me I saw an angel. Maybe she was right. Maybe the woman was protecting her, praying over her, or reading something meant only for that night. Maybe she was created by the half-awake mind of an 8-year-old who had already been too frightened to sleep alone. I cannot identify her, and I do not think there is a safe or reliable way to call her back. All I know is that when I remember her, I do not see a gentle picture from a church wall. I see a stranger standing over my sleeping mother at 2 or 3 in the morning, whispering from a dark book. I see the orange glow. I see the wings. And I see her turn toward me, place one finger against her lips, and quietly tell me not to wake the person she had come to watch. I was around 10 years old when I woke in the middle of the night and saw something in the corner of my bedroom. It must have been close to midnight, though I cannot remember checking a clock. My room was never completely dark. A small amount of light usually came through the window or from somewhere else in the house, leaving the furniture and walls faintly visible. It was the kind of darkness where you could still recognize the general shape of the room. My bedroom was square, and when I opened my eyes, I happened to look toward one of the upper corners. That was where I saw it. Even now, it is difficult to describe without making it sound like something designed for a horror film. The closest comparison I can make is the sun symbol associated with the band Godsmack, with a face in the center and thick, curved rays extending around it. But what I saw did not look like a drawing, decoration, or ordinary symbol. The face looked like a half moon, pale enough to stand out against the wall. Around it were thick strands of pure blackness. They twisted and curled outward like tendrils, smoke, or ink moving through water. They did not stretch across the entire room. They remained close to the face, wrapping and squirming around it in the corner. The darkness looked deeper than the shadows around it. The face had red eyes. They were not bright enough to light the room, but they were clearly red. They remained fixed on me. The face did not speak. It did not rush forward. It did not change expression. It simply stayed in the corner while the black tendrils moved around it. The stillness of the face made the movement surrounding it worse. If the whole image had shifted or flickered, I might have thought it was a shadow. Instead, the face seemed anchored in place while the darkness around it twisted continuously. I screamed for my mother. I did not call her name calmly or try to convince myself I was dreaming. I screamed as loudly as I could. I remember telling her there was something in the corner. She came into the room. I expected the usual response adults give frightened children. I thought she would turn on the light, glance around, and immediately tell me there was nothing there. She might point to a coat, curtain, toy, or shadow and explain what I had mistaken for a monster. Instead, she looked toward the corner. Then she stared. At the time, it felt as though she stood there for a very long time. I cannot say how many seconds actually passed. Childhood fear stretches time, especially when you are waiting for an adult to prove that something is not real. But she did not look away immediately. She did not laugh. She did not tell me I was imagining it. She continued watching the same corner where I had seen the face. Eventually, she took me out of the room and brought me into her bedroom to sleep. Nothing else was said. That silence lasted for 12 years. I never saw the thing again. There was no second appearance in another corner. I did not wake to find red eyes watching from a doorway or black tendrils spreading across the ceiling. As far as I knew, the event happened once and ended. My mother never brought it up. I did not ask her what she had seen. Perhaps I was afraid of the answer. Children often depend on adults to define reality for them. If my mother had said it was a shadow, I could have accepted that. If she had said it was a nightmare, I might have learned to treat the memory as one. Instead, she removed me from the room and then acted as though nothing had happened. That left me alone with my own interpretation. For years, I wondered whether I had dreamed it. The event began after I woke in the night, which is exactly when vivid sleep-related hallucinations can happen. A person can open their eyes and see the real bedroom while parts of a dream remain visible. Faces, figures, animals, insects, and moving shadows can appear on walls or in corners. These images often seem completely solid. They can remain for several seconds or even longer, especially when the room is dim. The brain is still partly dreaming, so it places an impossible image into a familiar environment. That explanation seemed reasonable. I was young. I had just awakened. The room was dark. A frightening face surrounded by moving black shapes could easily have been dream imagery. The red eyes might have come from something I had seen in a film, game, album cover, or artwork without consciously remembering it. The shape resembling the Godsmack sun may not be a coincidence. The brain often builds dreams from familiar symbols and images. Perhaps I had seen a similar design somewhere before. In the darkness, a shadow in the corner became that symbol. The tendrils moved because my eyes were still adjusting. The face remained because my frightened mind locked onto it. I could also have experienced pareidolia, where the brain sees a face in an unclear pattern. Corners often contain several intersecting shadows. Light from a window, doorway, or electronic device can create curved shapes on walls and ceilings. Curtains, tree branches, hanging objects, or textured paint can form patterns. The human brain is extremely quick to recognize faces, even when no face exists. Two dark or reflective points become eyes. A lighter patch becomes a mouth or cheek. The surrounding shadows become hair, horns, or tendrils. Once the brain identifies a face, it becomes difficult to see the original shapes again. The movement could have come from outside. Tree branches may have swayed in front of a streetlight or moonlit window. The shadows would twist slowly across the corner. If the center remained mostly still while the outer shadows moved, It could create exactly the effect I remembered, an unmoving face surrounded by curling darkness. The red eyes might have been small reflections, a toy with shiny eyes, a decorative object, a light from outside, or two tiny points from an electronic device could appear red in low light. From the bed, those reflections might align with a larger shadow pattern and complete the face. That is an ordinary explanation. It accounts for the shape, movement, and location. It also explains why I never saw the creature again. The exact combination of lighting, angle, objects, and outdoor movement may never have repeated. For 12 years, I leaned towards some version of that explanation. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe it had been a strange shadow. Maybe my mother had stared because she was trying to identify what had frightened me. Perhaps she took me to her room simply because I was too upset to sleep alone. Her silence did not necessarily mean she had seen anything. Parents sometimes avoid discussing childhood fears because they do not want to reinforce them. She may have believed that ignoring the event would help me forget. Then, about 2 months ago, the subject of paranormal experiences came up between us. I cannot remember exactly how the conversation began. We may have been discussing ghosts, strange houses, or things people claim to see at night. The old memory returned to me. I decided I was finally going to tell her what I had seen in the corner of my bedroom. I had not described it to her in detail before. As a child, I had only screamed that something was there. I did not tell her about the half-moon face, the twisting black tendrils, or the red eyes. At least I had no memory of ever telling her those things. I began to mention the creature. Before I could describe it, my mother interrupted me. She said, "The one with the red eyes?" That moment frightened me more than the original sighting. For 12 years, I had been able to question my memory. I could tell myself I had dreamed it. I could reduce it to childhood imagination. I could say my mother had seen only a frightened child in an empty corner, but she remembered the red eyes. She had supplied the one detail I had never knowingly told her. I felt a level of dread that is difficult to describe. The memory suddenly became shared. It was no longer only an image from the mind of a frightened 10-year-old. My mother said she had seen it too. She described it in a way that was close to how I remembered it. A face in the corner. Darkness moving around it. Red eyes. The details were not necessarily identical in every small way, but they matched enough that I could not dismiss the connection. She also told me there had been other strange activity happening around that period, things I had not known about as a child. I do not know every detail, and I do not want to add incidents I did not personally witness. What mattered was that she believed the face had not been the only unexplained thing in the house. That explained her reaction that night. She had not stood in the doorway only to humor me. She had looked into the corner and seen something worth staring at. Then she had removed me from the room. Her silence afterward may have been an attempt to protect me. If she had admitted that she saw it too, I might never have slept alone again. She may have decided that the safest response was to take me away and refuse to give the experience more power. That interpretation makes emotional sense. But it still does not prove that a supernatural creature was present. Shared visual experiences can happen for ordinary reasons. We were both looking at the same corner under the same lighting conditions. If there was a genuine shadow pattern resembling a face, both of us could see it. My scream and description that something was there directed my mother's attention. She entered already expecting to see something threatening. When she looked up, her brain may have interpreted the same pattern in a similar way. Suggestion strongly influences perception. If someone points into darkness and says there is a person standing there, other people are more likely to identify a person-shaped shadow. I may not have told her about the red eyes in a calm conversation, but I could have said more during the original panic than I remember. Children who are screaming often repeat details without later storing a clear memory of what they said. I might have shouted that it had red eyes while she was entering the room. She could have remembered that detail for 12 years while I forgot telling her. Then, when the subject came up recently, she repeated the phrase. From my perspective, it felt like independent confirmation. In reality, the information may have come from me. This is one of the strongest ordinary explanations. Memory is incomplete. The fact that I do not remember describing the red eyes does not prove I never did. The original event was intense. I was frightened, shouting, and probably speaking quickly. My mother may have asked what I saw. I may have answered. Years later, both of us remember only selected parts. Another possibility is that my mother's recent statement influenced my memory in return. When she said, "The one with the red eyes," I recognized the detail immediately because it matched my memory. But perhaps we had discussed it at some earlier time that neither of us now recalls clearly. The event may not have remained completely unspoken for 12 years. There could have been brief references, jokes, or conversations that faded from memory. Families often repeat stories without remembering when each detail became shared. What feels like secret independent knowledge may have circulated years earlier. I cannot prove that the red eyes were never mentioned. The similarity of our descriptions may also have grown during the recent conversation. One person says the shape was round. The other compares it to a moon. One remembers dark lines. The other calls them tendrils. As they talk, the memories move closer together. This does not mean either person is lying. Memory is cooperative. People naturally build a shared version of an event from overlapping details. By the end of the conversation, both may feel they remembered the same image from the beginning. The core agreement still matters. But exact matching details should be treated cautiously. There may also have been a physical object in the corner that created the face. A decoration, mask, poster, toy, or wall pattern could have been visible under certain lighting. If my mother later removed it, changed the furniture, or closed the blinds, the effect would never repeat. She may not remember the object now. The house itself could cast unusual reflections. Car headlights passing outside can move across walls in twisting patterns. A red taillight or traffic signal might create two reddish points. Branches moving in front of the light could form thick black lines around a pale central shape. When the car stopped or moved slowly, the image might remain for several seconds. My mother entered during the same lighting event and saw it too. She stared because it looked strange. Then the light source moved away and the image disappeared. If the explanation was not immediately obvious, she may have chosen not to discuss it. The visual could have looked supernatural while still being entirely environmental. The problem is that I remember it as stable. The face did not slide across the wall like headlights. The eyes remained fixed, the tendrils twisted near the center. But childhood memories preserve emotional structure better than physical accuracy. I may have watched it for only a few seconds. The motion could have been different from what I now picture. Another possibility is that my mother did not actually see the same image that night, but came to believe she did later. Seeing her child terrified may have made the moment memorable. Over the years, she may have reconstructed the corner, using my fear and any details I gave her. When the paranormal conversation occurred, she remembered the story as a shared sighting. Memory confidence is not always equal to memory accuracy. Adults can misremember just as children can. Her certainty does not guarantee that a face physically appeared. Still, her immediate interruption remains difficult for me to dismiss. She did not wait for me to describe the eyes. She volunteered them. Her response came too quickly to feel like she was guessing. The supernatural explanation is that something genuinely appeared in the room and was visible to both of us. It may have been a spirit, entity, or manifestation connected to the other strange activity my mother later described. The face had no visible body because it did not need one. The black tendrils may have been its form, moving around a central mask-like feature. The red eyes watched from the corner, while the rest of it remained partly hidden. When I screamed, my mother entered and saw it. She did not confront it because she did not know what it was. She took me away from the room and kept silent to prevent me from becoming more frightened. Perhaps it disappeared after we left. Maybe it never returned because whatever activity was occurring in the house eventually ended. This interpretation fits our memories as we understand them. But there is no physical evidence. No photograph was taken. Nothing touched me. There were no marks on the wall. The face did not speak or move from the corner. No third person saw it. The event happened in the middle of the night immediately after I woke, under poor lighting conditions. Those facts strongly support a visual illusion or sleep-related experience. My mother's presence complicates the explanation, but it does not make ordinary causes impossible. Two people can misinterpret the same shadows. A child can unknowingly give an adult details during panic. A mother can remember a child's description as something she saw personally. Shared memories can change over 12 years. I try to hold both possibilities at once. I do not want to claim that we definitely saw a supernatural being. I also cannot honestly say the memory feels like a simple nightmare. What frightened me at 10 was the image itself. What frightens me now is the confirmation. For most of my life, the memory belonged only to me. I could weaken it by doubting myself. Then, my mother used the words red eyes before I had described them. That removed the safety of being the only witness. It also changed the meaning of her silence that night. I used to think she had taken me to her room because I was hysterical. Now I remember the way she looked into the corner. She did not glance. She stared. At the time, I waited for her to tell me nothing was there. She never did. She simply took me away. Perhaps she was studying a strange shadow. Perhaps she was deciding whether to frighten me by admitting she saw it too. Perhaps she saw exactly what I saw. I think the most likely explanation is a combination of a sleep-related hallucination and shared misinterpretation. I woke while part of my brain was still dreaming and saw the half-moon face with red eyes. A real shadow pattern existed in the corner, possibly created by branches, streetlights, or objects in the room. My scream brought my mother in. She looked where I pointed and saw enough of the same pattern to understand why I was terrified. During the panic, I may have told her about the red eyes without remembering it. She removed me from the room and chose not to discuss it again. 12 years later, she repeated the detail I had unknowingly given her. That explanation accounts for both our memories without requiring an entity. It is reasonable. It is probably the answer I would give if the story belonged to someone else. But when I return to that night, I still see the corner of the square room. The bedroom is dim, but not completely dark. I wake and glance upward. A pale half-moon face hangs near the ceiling. Thick black tendrils curl around it like living ink. Two red eyes stare down at me. The face does not move. The darkness around it twists continuously. I scream until my mother enters. She follows my gaze. Then, she stops. For what feels like forever, neither of us looks away from the corner. She does not say it is a shadow. She does not turn on the light and show me an ordinary object. She takes me by the hand and leads me to her room. For 12 years, we never speak about it. Then, during an unrelated conversation, I finally decide to tell her what I saw. Before I can describe the face, she says, "The one with the red eyes?" Maybe I told her everything that night and forgot. Maybe we both saw the same combination of shadows. Maybe two memories slowly became one over the years. Those explanations are possible, but they do not change the feeling I had when she interrupted me. In that moment, I was 10 years old again, looking toward the corner and waiting for my mother to tell me there was nothing there. Only this time, 12 years later, she finally gave me the answer she had withheld. She had seen it too.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.